Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us this afternoon. It is 4 o'clock, so we are going to get started right on time. And thanks for joining us for learning a little bit more about how you can create a community in your online classroom. If you are new with us and you haven't joined us for some of our previous webinars, my name is Valerie Howe and I'll be guiding you through this today. I'm a customer success specialist here at D2L. In my former life, I was an educator. I taught for 5 years and I have a mix of experience from both the secondary and elementary panels. So I'm really excited to be here with you today and chat about how Brightspace can be helping you out with your online or blended teaching. I have also put my Twitter handle on the screen, so feel free to give me a follow if you'd like to receive some updates and in terms of what's coming out with Brightspace or information about future webinars. For our agenda today, you might remember from our session description that this session will be broken into 2 parts. So the first half hour or so is going to be a 30-ish minute webinar about how we can be using Brightspace tools and digital tools to help create a community in our online classroom. And with that, we'll be talking about this community of inquiry framework, in which I'll explain in a few slides about how can we be having a mix of a teacher presence, a social presence, and a cognitive presence in our online space to enhance engagement and the learning experience for our students. And then as I mentioned, the last 30-ish minutes or so will be an Ask the Expert session where you will be able to ask some of your Brightspace questions, and we'll have some experts on the line to help answer and give some advice. Before we get into the meat and the bulk of what we're here to talk about today, I do just want to go over some housekeeping items. So again, we're going to continue throughout this series to use the term district as a kind of an umbrella term for where it might be that you work. We do have lots of folks joining us from all over North America, so we'll be sticking with district as our generic term for today. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A pod at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer these questions during our Ask the Expert session. So if you're wondering where that is, if you're in your Zoom screen or window and you scroll your cursor down to the bottom, there should be a little menu bar that pops up. And then there will be a little kind of communication bubble icon and Q&A, and you can just pop your questions in there. We will if you're having technical difficulties or any issues with the webinar, also feel free to post in there. We do have someone who will be keeping an eye for anything that's urgent, but otherwise we'll be answering them in the Ask the Expert session in the later half of the webinar. And we will also be putting our recording and the slide deck on the education webinar site, which is where you would have went to register for today's webinar. We'll need a little bit of time to get that up, but just to say that you don't have to worry about following along today. Feel free to just watch and take it in, and you'll be able to watch the recording on demand and then access all of the links in the slide deck from that website. Okay, so we're gonna get into the session today and then talking about how we can be creating a community in our online space. And to do that, I want to first take a step back and chat about a community of inquiry. And if you were with us last week, we did chat a little bit about this with the promise of talking more about it today. So the community of inquiry is a framework for creating a positive and engaging experience online. So the idea with this is that to create this community of inquiry and using it to facilitate, an online environment where students are engaged and having this positive educational experience online, that there are 3 presences that need to be created. And this research from Garrison, Anderson, and Archer highlights the teaching presence, so that kind of teacher persona, that social presence of being able to have a sense of belonging and interacting with people, and that cognitive presence. And we'll be chatting about how this fits into the K-12 framework. And I know from my own personal experience, sometimes sometimes online learning can almost be quite transactional. Work gets posted or activities, students complete that, they get feedback, repeat. Not always, but sometimes there's student interaction, not always is there kind of student interaction built in. So if we're thinking about developing more of this community-like feel, we want to think about how we can be bringing in all aspects of this community of inquiry on a regular basis. And again, depending on your class, some of these presences may be stronger at different times in your course. So for example, it'd be totally normal for your teaching and cognitive presences to be stronger as you begin your online course and developing a rapport with your students, and then bringing in more opportunities for a social presence later on. And to be fully transparent, this model that you see on the screen, it was originally developed for higher education. However, with some tweaks to include K-12 pedagogy, many have found this framework very helpful for creating a community in the K-12 space, so much so that researchers from Central China Normal University, Wei, Hu, Zhao, and Lau, they took this community of inquiry framework and they applied it to the face-to-face K-12 classroom. They wanted to see how much it resonated there. And they actually found that a lot of it applied, but with some differences in that face-to-face classroom. And I've pulled out some examples here from their paper and their research. So again, we have our three main presences on the top, and then this is where they pulled in some examples from K-12 and how this community of inquiry can exist in the face-to-face classroom. So for today, we're obviously talking more about that online space. So I'm going to be taking a mix of both of these kind of frameworks and thinking about the online, thinking about face-to-face, thinking about examples and stories I've heard from educators in the field, my own personal experiences as well from my teaching background, to think about how we can bring some of this online to really have that full rounded and holistic community and experience online. And just one thing to note here is that not every single activity that you're doing online has to have all three of these presences. It's not something where, I have to make sure I'm ticking all these boxes every single time I post or do something, but it's about providing a healthy mix of these presences throughout your course and providing opportunities for these presences to help create that community in your online classroom. And obviously there's a lot of kind of information in these papers and these experiences. So when we think about all of that information and what the important bits are to touch on, I came up with some of these kind of guiding questions for today. And I would like to say that, this is not an exhaustive list. We are only together for a short time today. So there are many different ways to create a community in an online space. And I'm sure that many people will find their own, and there will be lots of things that I don't have time to cover today, but we'll use these questions as a bit of a framework. And when we think about creating this online community, we want to think about how do we create an environment that's engaging, it's challenging, and it's stimulating so that students are coming and being a part of that and wanting to experience it. How do we create the sense of belonging that also provides interaction for students and interaction between the teacher and the student, because that's also an important part of that social presence. And also, how do we facilitate learning where students feel that they're guided through by an educator who cares about their success and their well-being? And if you were here with us last week, we chatted about that a little bit more in the sense of how do we let our students know that there's that real life person behind the screen who's, rooting for them and is cheering them on and really cares about their learning and their success and their well-being. So with that, I am going to spend most of the webinar time in a live demo space today. And we'll be chatting about how we can use various digital tools to engage, stimulate, and challenge students, how we can use tools to provide that opportunity for student interaction and educator-student interaction, and as well as how we can be using digital tools to facilitate and guide students in their learning, not just through the actual posting of materials, but also through feedback. And one disclaimer that I want to say is, I mentioned we have a lot of folks with us from all across North America today. Keep just remember to keep in mind your district policies, your union guidance, so on and so forth. What I'll be sharing today, they're just suggestions, they're examples, they're tips that I've heard from out in the field or that I've seen with in my own experiences to just provide some ideas and get those kind of creative juices flowing about what this could look like in your own online classroom. Okay, so I'm just going to flip into my course here. And so now you can see that I'm in my online classroom, and because we don't have a ton of time here together, I wanted to pull out 3 tools that I think really give the most bang for your buck, if you will, in terms of being able to incorporate all 3 of these presences. Like I said, not everything that you do has to be including all 3 of these presences every time, but I wanted to show you some examples of tools that make it easier to incorporate some of those presences throughout. And the first tool that I want to talk about is this activity feed tool. Just a quick shout out here, a reminder that your space might look different depending on how your district has set it up. If you have any questions about that, or you're seeing something here that you don't have, just reach out to your Brightspace administrator and they should be able to help you out. So for example, if after today you really want to get going and using Activity Feed, but you don't see it here and you need some help with that, you can reach out to your Brightspace administrator, or we do have some webinars on how you can edit this homepage that I'll call out later in our resource section. So back to our community of inquiry and incorporating our teacher, our social, and our cognitive presence. So one thing that I really love about Activity Feed is I find this to be an easier way to incorporate all 3. So if we start with that idea of teacher presence, you know, providing that direct instruction, guiding students, providing content that helps achieve learning goals and is stimulating and interesting, Activity Feed can be a really great way to do that. First and foremost, because this message is coming from you. Your students will be able to see that you're here communicating with them in this environment. My name is, it's Ms. K-12 Educator, so those would be my initials. And because I'm logged in, it's showing me, but for my students, it would show my name. And this can be me guiding them through their work for that day. So maybe I'm doing a daily post here to help guide them through what I want them to be doing that day. Maybe it's a weekly post. Again, this will really depend on you and your class. For older students, this course might be more self-paced. So maybe you're not necessarily having that super directed guidance, but you're posting supplementary materials for them or using this as more of an engagement space. If you have younger students, you might be posting a daily message here and linking to what you want them to do for that day to really easily guide them through what they need to do. And it also allows you to post a variety of materials. So again, if we think about that teacher presence in that, you know, stimulating, providing that kind of drive for learning, Activity Feed is really great in letting me build in various areas of the course. So again, maybe I have younger students and I don't want them necessarily navigating to content or to, you know, discussions or to assignments, so on and so forth. I have so many options of how I want to link resources, regardless of whether they're in Brightspace or out of Brightspace. So I can upload a file that I might have. I can really easily link to something else in the course. So maybe I've already made a lesson in content. Maybe I've made a checklist to help keep them organized for that week, a discussion post, my Google Drive, my OneDrive. You can see here that it's quite a big list. And you also have an option for some virtual conferencing tools. So again, depending on what you want to be doing with your students in the space, maybe you want to have a class meeting, you want to have small kind of group work sessions, so on and so forth. There are tools here to provide that video conferencing. I have done another webinar on video tools within Brightspace. So if you're interested in that, I have linked to that in the slide deck. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, but this would be a really great way for, you know, having your students see you, interact with you, and again, that social idea of them being able to interact with each other. I can also attach a website here if I need. So maybe I'm using Brightspace as my hub here so that students know they need to come to one spot so I can guide them through what they need to do, but then there might be another resource. I can make that really easy to help facilitate and guide their learning for that. Again, I also have another option here to attach from my Google Drive, my OneDrive, and to insert a video from the web. And I do have an example that I've made down here. And what I really love about Activity Feed as well is it allows you to make a quick message and get a bit more personal with your students. And by personal, I just mean a little bit less formal. There can be a tendency sometimes in online learning to write very formal messages, and that for K-12, I find in particular, it kind of hinders that kind of nice, warm community feel. So being able to come in here and type a quick message, you know, maybe in the same tone that I might do if I was face-to-face with them, and also being able to bring in those cognitive presences, because again, depending on how I frame that activity, I can incorporate that cognitive presence by providing an opportunity for inquiry, exploration, and as well as maybe giving students an option to reflect in the comments. And earlier in the PowerPoint, I had mentioned, you know, sometimes in online learning, there might be a lot of interaction between a student and a teacher, excuse me, but sometimes it's harder to build in that student to student interaction. And Activity Feed's another really great way to do that. So in this example, and I'll show you in a minute, I've linked to something in content to a virtual field trip to Mars. And I invited my students to, you know, put some comments down below. Being able to have comments in Activity Feed is optional, but it's a really, really, really great way to get students chatting, to get them asking questions. You can come in and ask as well. They can answer each other's questions, so on and so forth. So again, Activity Feed is a really great way to be kind of meeting all three of those presences and having that community-like feel in your classroom. So you can see here, I have a link to an activity, Let's Go to Mars, and I'm going to come in here. And this is an example of how I can really easily make use of other tools within Brightspace, but have it posted nice front and center for my students. And I'm gonna click in and I'm gonna ignore the instructions that I gave for students. I'm gonna skip the intro here in a minute. But this is a really great way for you to be putting resources into Brightspace like a hub and still making use of other digital tools that might exist not in Brightspace. So for example, this is a Mars exploration. Maybe in our science, we're doing a physics unit, we're talking about planets, we're learning about Mars. This can be a really easy way to have all of my students, and you can see I'm just moving my cursors now as I wait for this to load, to be doing this interactive activity, but right within Brightspace. And you can see that I've actually put it into my content. I could have linked this right into Activity Feed and had them taken out to another website, but one tip that I want to give you is to be using content here. This is where I'm in this content to create lessons, almost like you would for your teacher binder. And posting to Activity Feed and pulling it in when you want to clearly direct student learning. And I have two reasons why I recommend that. One is that this will help with teacher presence. If you have maybe some older students who are coming into content themselves, and they're going through or they're looking for an activity that you did last week, or they're looking for a resource, this will help with that organization and facilitating. You know, my teachers clearly come in here and they've laid things out. You can choose what they see and what they don't. So again, that kind of guiding and facilitating from the teacher presence, but also for you, it will just make your life so much easier. Brightspace has the ability to copy from year to year. So if I teach this class again next year, I can copy all of this content into my course, or if I teach this course 2 years down the road, I can copy all of this over to my next course and not have to start from scratch, and it will be nice and organized. So that's just a little tip there for you. Okay, so that's Activity Feed. Moving on to the second tool that I think will give you again, will really easily help incorporate all of these presences is the discussions tool. So I'm going to pop into this, and this is an area where, you know, students you can come and you can post topics, you can get them writing chatting with each other, so on and so forth. And why I think this is really great for creating that community is because, again, it's very easy to hit all three of those presences in this environment. So for my teacher presence, I can come and I can give really clear instructions, I can give guidance, I can differentiate my learning. You can see here I have a video. I'm just going to go in here and edit this topic. So what I love about this is that it doesn't all have to be written. That's something that we get a lot of feedback from students, is that in online courses, it can be really text heavy, it's a bit draining, it's not that interactive. By being able to use various multimedia components, you can help bring that stimulation, that differentiation, so on and so forth. So I have a little video here. I came up to my insert stuff, and I inserted a video note, which allowed me to take a really quick clip myself. This also lets me upload videos. So an example I had showed last week is I made a quick Screencastify video where I recorded a PowerPoint presentation that was all about the teacher. And then I could use this video note feature to upload that and introduce myself and maybe have students, you know, comment underneath or so on and so forth. And I can also have that written instructions. So again, that kind of clear guidance and feedback, because me as an educator, I'll also be able to comment when they make posts. I can have that interaction with them as well. And again, for that cognitive piece of, you know, triggering that desire for learning, the positive interaction, if we kind of think about those different levels of engaging with the material, knowledge, and application, those are all options for here as well, depending on how you want to frame the activity and what your goal of the activity is. In order to be able to facilitate that positive thinking, creating an opportunity to reflect, discuss with peers, problem solve, apply learning to those real life situations, so on and so forth. But again, it will depend on the goal of your post. If your post is for students to you know, introduce and get to know each other, that might not be the same as something where you have a direct kind of learning goal for a topic or an expectation that you're hoping to cover in your course. And what I also love about the discussions tool is that it can really easily, in my opinion, incorporate that social presence. Again, because we have written and video options, your students would have those options as well. So it doesn't always have to be text. It can be them coming in and making a quick video as well. Just going to make this a bit smaller here, collapse my forum. But there's lots of different ways to promote that social presence. And again, when we think of the social presence, we can think of that in terms of interaction with the teacher and students, with each other. We can also think about that as a sense of belonging. So you can see here, there is an ability in discussions to have one-on-one groups. So as an educator, I've made groups here where only me and that student will be able to access this topic, and we can chat back and forth about their work, their progress in the course, so on and so forth. And kind of that sense of belonging, that they have a spot for them. This is very clearly their space to communicate with me. Maybe you don't want to be communicating with students for email, or there's not another method that you might have. This is an option for you to create that, you know, that special space for them. But I can also have group work in my discussion tool as well. So if I come here and I edit that topic, and I have, again, an example of a reading group, and you know, I have the Paper Bag Princess, so maybe a story aimed for younger students, but this would work with, you know, any subject, any kind of topic where you might want them doing group work. And what this means is that the students who I have, if I just go to restrictions here for a moment, in my reading group A, there we go. We're going to go just back one more screen here. The students who I have in my reading group A, oh, there we go, because it's coming up here because I already selected this option earlier. My apologies. So I have this set, I have a group setting created in my Brightspace where I have students grouped into various reading groups. What this means is that only students in this reading group A are going to be able to come in and see this story. So I'm also providing that kind of small social interaction where students will have an easier time connecting and communicating with each other. And it's nice to mix that up. Sometimes you might want to have discussions where the whole class is involved. Sometimes you might want to set up some groups with that smaller interaction. So students, it's just a little bit more of that intimate setting. And remember that as an educator, you also have options here to be setting up these topics. And again, if we think about that teacher presence in that face-to-face classroom, one of the items there was that idea of management and ensuring that learning activities are effective. And you can do that as well here. So you have some options you can allow anonymous posts, but as an educator, you can still see who has posted. So I know when I've heard of some teachers, when they're getting students kind of used to posting in this forum, because it can be a bit intimidating at first, they let them do it anonymously, but let them know full well that, here are the guidelines, it needs to be respectful, and that they can still see who is posting what to make sure that everything is appropriate. You can also ensure that if you want to be so that you have to moderate a post before it displays. So if you want to be able to go and approve that post before it shows, you can do that, which I know some educators find kind of helpful towards the beginning when they're getting used to their students. They're kind of helping and guiding them about how to socially participate in this online space. And then a really common feature is that users must start a thread before they can read and reply to other threads. So again, if we're thinking more about that learning and cognitive presence, if I want students to be exploring, I want them to be inquiring, I want them to be doing all those kinds of things, but I want to make sure that they're having a chance to provide their kind of own thoughts, their own reflections before reading someone else's, I can make it so that they have to reply to the topic that I've posted before they can go and see what other students commented. Okay. So that's another way that discussions can be really great for having all three of those presences. And then actually, last but not least, I just want to note here that as you start to get to know your students and you learn, their interests and so on and so forth, I have also heard of educators coming and having not necessarily fully academic topics in their discussions. So as you maybe start learning more about your class, maybe you have some really avid bakers or cookers, or maybe that was something that came up in a class discussion. I have heard of people kind of putting in a social piece here. And again, knowing that you have those controls of, moderating a post, so on and so forth, to just kind of bring in that social feel and ability to kind of chat with other students like they would be in a face-to-face classroom. And the last tool that I want to chat about is assignments. So sometimes you don't want everyone to see everything. Sometimes things, their assignments, their assessments, their activities, you need to see them. You don't necessarily need all other students to see them. And that's where assignments can be really great, because it doesn't always have to be formal assessments. It can also just be activities like students might work on in the classroom and then they submit to you for feedback. And while the assignments more so than incorporates that kind of cognitive and teacher presence, the options that you have for this are simply, in my opinion, amazing. In my teaching, I didn't have access to Brightspace, and I really wish I did. And why I love this is because it can be so great for guiding the students in their success. So that teacher presence, how are you guiding them to be successful? What do they need to know? And that feedback that comes with the teacher presence for having them engage, feeling like they're getting what they need in that kind of course. But also kind of switching it up and bringing in kind of, I'll call it a pseudo interaction, if you will, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. So again, when we think about that teacher presence of guiding, I have the ability to be adding in rubrics for my students. I love this because, again, we know how important that success criteria and that guidance from an educator can be in ensuring that students are successful in their learning. But again, in having that student feel like they belong and that they're a unique individual person in that course, which they absolutely are, I can come in and I can personalize that feedback specific to this rubric for that student. So I can come in and I can type in more feedback here and personalize it for that student, so they really have that sense of, yep, okay, like this is my course and this is my teacher, and I really you know, I'm getting what I need and I'm getting that information and that guidance just for me, and I belong here. Another thing that is really great in just kind of switching up how you're giving feedback to those students is, again, being able to come and do these annotations for students. And there's so many options. I love this. It allows you to give some really great kind of personal feedback for them per assignment. And then what I'm really excited to touch on again, and if you were here with us last week, this will be a refresher, but it was worth repeating twice for thinking about how we can be having that teacher presence. And you'll remember when I was still in the slide deck, I had said, you know, how do we let students know that there's this teacher behind the screen, this real live person who really cares about their success and their well-being? And something that I have heard a lot of educators take advantage of is that you don't have to just provide written feedback in Brightspace. We do have options for being able to make quick little videos. I know a lot of educators like doing that so that students can hear them, hear their tone, their voice, hear their enthusiasm for those things that they did really, really well in their assignment or their activity, and being able to give that feedback, that constructive criticism, in a more kind of nurturing way, instead of it being read and sometimes students interpreting a tone that's not there, and so on and so forth. And also being able to do a quick audio clip if you don't, if you're a little bit camera shy, that's perfectly okay. There is also that audio portion as well. And this can be really great for, again, just letting the students kind of see you and hear you, and almost kind of feel like they're seeing and talking with you about their work, even if it's not a synchronous moment. So providing those asynchronous opportunities to be interacting with your students. Okay, so I'm going to flip back to my PowerPoint because we are coming up into our office hours portion. And I'm not going to go into full detail on this slide. I did mention that this is not by any means you know, exhaustive. We only had about 30 minutes here today, and there's lots and lots and lots more examples that I could give. I have put some a summary of some of the things that I've chatted about today in this slide. I've also put in some examples that I wasn't able to fit into the demo portion of today. So just different ways that we can be invoking these different presences in our course to create that community. I have also linked to various webinars or tools. So for example, I had mentioned that I've done a webinar on video tools within Brightspace. I've linked that here. I did a whole webinar on using the discussions tool. I've linked that here. And I've also linked another resource here for you. If you are newer to Brightspace, I know a lot of that was examples and it wasn't always a how-to. I have put a bunch of how-to resources in the slide deck. I'm not going to go through them all, but basically a lot of the things that I did today, I do have how-to slides here to guide you through it, so you'll be able to access this again on that educator webinar website. So we have touched all of our learning objectives today. If you're looking for how you can get going and give this a try with your class, I do have some suggested activities here. So if you're looking for how you can get going, I suggest you come and do one of our give this a try activities, particularly posting an activity feed or switching up how you're giving feedback to students by giving a mix of audio or video. If you've been here before, you know we love to leave you with resources, so I'm not going to go through them all. Anything here is hyperlinked to a resource to help you depending on what information you might be wanting to access later. We do have some upcoming webinars, so we are doing a webinar every Thursday until the end of summer. Next week, we have supporting non-screen activities in your online classroom. So if that's something that you think would be helpful for you and your students, feel free to register and we'd love to see you there. I've also linked to a lot of past webinars that we've done. Any topic on this screen is linked to the recording of the webinar that we did, and then you can access the slide deck on the Educator webinar site. Our last resource slide is some Brightspace tutorial videos that are organized pedagogically speaking. So for example, if you're looking about more information about how you can document student learning with Brightspace, anything underlined here is linked to a quick tutorial video. And last but not least, thank you so much for joining us for the webinar portion for today. I hope you found it useful. If you're sticking around for the Ask the Experts session, awesome. If you need to take off, no problems. I hope you have a wonderful day. And with that, we are going to turn into our Ask the Experts section for today. So if you're just joining us now for the question period of today, welcome. I've got Heather Ryan here on the line with me, and we've got Josh as well. How's it going, Heather? You are on mute if you're trying to talk.
I know, I always am. Hi, guys. Sorry, I always have a problem finding my mute button.
No problem. Okay, so I'm just going to pop into the questions here. Okay. Okay, so the first question I'm going to touch on is from Heather. I have a question regarding activity feed. I have heard that when you post an assignment in activity feed, it doesn't go into the Dropbox properly sometimes. If you have the Dropbox already set up, is that true? So I don't believe that that is true. I'm just going to head back into my environment here. One thing that I will say is that there are two ways that you can be using activity feed to create an assignment, and it kind of depends on your personal workflow or what you want your assignment to do, if that makes sense. And hopefully as I keep talking, it will. So if I come into activity feed and I click the plus here, I have the option for message and assignment. I'm going to click into my assignments tab. I can create a Dropbox somewhere for students to submit an activity or an item right on the fly. This does have limited functionality. It's just meant to be a really quick way to set up an assignment. And again, it doesn't always have to be a true assignment. It can also just be an activity. So depending on what you're referencing here, it could be that it just not all the functionality maybe that was wanted was there, and that's fine. If you are looking for all of the true functionality, all those kind of like nitty-gritty details that you can be doing, for this flow that you see, we've pulled out the most common pieces that instructors and educators are adding to their assignment. There's a lot more that you can do if you want to get a bit more fancy with it, in which case you could go to assignments, make your assignment there, and then you could click select existing. I just joined two words there. And then you could come and you could find the one that you made, and it would pull in all of that information. So I hope that provides a little bit more context to it, but in terms of creating that actual folder where the work goes, it should do that no problem. So I hope that answers your question, Heather. Next question from Rachel. Does the Google Translate extension in Chrome translate D2L platform? I'm thinking about how to incorporate language learners who don't speak English yet. That's a fantastic question. I'll be honest, I haven't played too much with that. My understanding is that it does do that within here. So I have heard of that being something that educators and students do. Another option that you can do is that in content and assignments, this is getting a little bit fancy. we do have something called release conditions where you can conditionally release something to some learners and not others. So if maybe I have a resource that is in that student's mother tongue, and I don't necessarily need all of the students to access it. I just need that student to access it. I can come to, I'm actually just gonna unhide, I'm gonna make that visible so student would see it. And then I can come to my options here and I can view release conditions. And what I could do is that in the group tool, I could make a group of all the students who maybe speak that mother tongue. I could put them in one group, and then what I could do is I could come to condition type, and if you come here under class list, there's an option for group enrollment. I could come and I could select one of those groups, and what that means is that only those students would be able to see that resource. So that could be one option of how you're differentiating for those learners. Another option that I hear as well that some educators do in trying to help with that proficiency of English language skills is in the activity feed tool, there is an option when you're saving the file to put in closed captioning. So I know that's something that's also quite common, is putting on that closed captioning option of your videos so that students are kind of matching the written captioning with you speaking to help guide them through that. So I hope that that helps as some examples. Okay. Okay, so we do have a question about how to get access to the slides. The resources and the slides will be up on the educator webinar site. So where you went to register for today's session, you'll be able to get all of the resources there. Okay, so getting lots of questions about creating groups. You're welcome, Irene. Okay, so groups is awesome. I'm just gonna go ahead and say that. And we are actually doing a session on this in a few weeks. Heather can keep me honest here. I think it's the second last week of August, I wanna say. Actually, I could just look.
I'm just pulling it up right now
Because I
here.
have it in my PowerPoint.
Learning groups, Thursday, August 20th, 4 p.m.
Awesome. But we'll give you a little sneak peek now, why not? So depending on how your nav bar is set up, this up here is my nav bar with my tools, you might have the group tool on this nav bar, but if you don't, have no fear, it will be in your course admin, which is your big kind of toolkit of all of the resources that you have. And just a reminder that only you as an educator can see your course admin, your students can't see this. And then you can see here I have it set up by category. You might have it set up alphabetically, but under learner management, I can come into my groups tool. And then this is where I can come and I can create a new category of groups. So I could give them a name. So maybe this is science. Maybe we're doing a virtual science fair, or I want them doing some collaboration in the online space and kind of sharing resources and so on and so forth. So I can come and I can give a description of what this group would be. I also have an option for how I want students to be enrolled into groups. So I can make it so that I'm manually placing students into groups. I could have the system auto enroll students into groups. So I could say, you know, I want 5 groups of 3 kids, and it's gonna do its magic, and it's gonna put them all into groups. I could also make it so that students have to self-enroll into groups. I've seen educators do this sometimes when students have to sign up for kind of a project. So maybe there's an independent learning, like an ISP, sorry, an independent study project, getting tongue-tied here, and they don't necessarily want the students doing all the same topics, so they'll make them sign up, and then they might use discussions, or they might use release conditions to release information for that topic specifically to those people doing the group work, so that's an option. And then there is also that option to really easily make that single user. So when I showed that example of the one-to-one groups, that was how I did that. This is an option that some districts give and some don't. So if you're not seeing it there, you could just go and do number of groups, you know, however many kids you have in your class, and have them auto enroll. But you could also ask your Brightspace administrator about flipping that on. And then I would come in and I would save, and depending on how I set it up, my groups would populate, or I would add students in. And then whenever I have that group option, so for release conditions or for assignments or for discussion, so on and so forth, I'll then have that, that option. And I can always come back and edit it here. So for example, if I go to my reading groups, I have my reading groups here. I can come in and I can see who's in that group. I can enroll people into that group. I can view who's in that group, do some changing around, so on and so forth. And then this also ties into, we had a similar question with groups, but in discussion. So if I want to come and maybe I want to make a new topic, and I only want a certain group to be able to see that topic, I can create a new topic. It does have to live in a forum. Usually when I chat about discussions with people, I like to use a filing cabinet analogy, if you'll humor me for a second. So if we think about a filing cabinet, your forum is your drawer, your topic is your file folders, and then your threads are the papers that would be in those different file folders. So for the organization purpose, the Brightspace, my topic has to live in a folder. So maybe I want it to be in creative writing. You can see here, I have the option for topic type. So I can open that topic to everyone. I want every single student in my class to see this. I can also come in and I can give it into different groups. So this means that I'm going to post the same instructions for everyone, but I only want people in reading groups to be able to interact with each other for it. So when my students come online, they're going to see this topic, but they're only going to see posts from the people in that group. You could also come up to, oops, it's going to make me give it a title. Thank you, Brightspace, for that friendly reminder. We'll just stick with creative writing 4. That's where I can also come to my restrictions tab. And I have some different options here too. So I can also do release conditions, and I can do that also by topic. I can also do it by forum. So I could create a whole, again, if we think about that filing cabinet, I could create a whole drawer that only one group could see. Okay.
Val, there's just a quick question about groups,
Yes.
about enrolling students in and out of different groups.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, oh, I see that. So can I enroll students in and out of groups? Yes, so you can come in here. Let me go back to my course admin. And I'm gonna go back down to groups. And I'm gonna go into my reading group. And yes, so I can come and change it up here. So if I needed to add an extra group, so maybe I originally I only wanted 2 groups, maybe now I need to break it down into 3, I can do that. I can come and edit everything here, so on and so forth. I am gonna just give that a quick save. But in each group, I can also come in and I can change that enrollment. So here I can come and I can view who is in that class, or sorry, in that group, pardon me, I can also come in here and I can enroll users as well. So you can see here, this is my class list. It's a very small class list, but maybe Alpha and Lenny, maybe there's a bit of friction there, or I want to switch this group up. I could unclick one, that person's no longer in that group, and I could put a new person in that group and save. And then that group has now been changed up and it would be reflected immediately for those new group members. So I hope that helps. Okay, and I'm just seeing a follow-up group. Do you enroll students in groups by their emails? No, so the groups function is going, if I understand this question correctly, the groups function is going to work based on your class list. So your students will already be in the course and then they'll be there and then they should get a notification when there's something for them to do in that group. So they'll get a notification about signing up for a group. Up here, they might get a notification that there's a group available. And then anything else, they would likely get information in a different way, if that makes sense. So if I've created up group discussions, and I've set up a discussion topic by groups, they would get an alert that a discussion topic has been created, and then they would go in and they would have their group discussion. Or same thing with an assignment. If I've created an assignment, whether it's a group assignment or not a group assignment, they'll get a notification that I've created an assignment for them.
There's just another question here, Val, asking for the difference between groups and sections.
Yeah, beautiful. Great question. Thanks, Laura, for that question. So the difference between a group and a section, sections will be if two courses have been combined into one. In Brightspace is usually where you'll see a section. So for example, if I am teaching, just gonna use an Ontario example because that's what's coming to my mind. If I'm teaching 2 periods of grade 9 English, English 1D maybe, then I could ask for my Brightspace administrator to put those 2 classes into one, because a lot of the content, the topic, the assignments, and everything that I'm doing is likely going to be the same. I don't want to have to create an assignment in one and do it in another and post an assignment in one and post it in another. But I still will need, at times, the ability to differentiate between those 2 sections. So what that section is allowing me to do is to create a discussion, to create posts, to create release conditions for one whole section. So maybe class A, I have a special discussion topic for them because maybe they're really kind of blazing through this, they're doing really well, and I want to challenge them a bit more. Another thing that's really cool about this is that in Activity Feed, and unfortunately, I don't have a section in my class, so the option won't show up. But in Activity Feed, you do have the option if your post is going to go to both of your sections or one of your sections. But from the student perspective, they'll still just see it in their course. So your students might not necessarily know that they're in a class with multiple sections, but it makes it a bit easier for you. And this isn't just a high school example. A lot of kindergarten classes, the information, the class list from the student information system might come in a junior kindergarten and a senior kindergarten roster. A lot of kindergarten teachers will have that. A lot of school boards, or sorry, I should say districts, will merge those together so that all the students are in the same course shell for them. And then the way that you can still divide up your learners would be, if your course doesn't have sections, because not all courses will have a section, is to make those groups. So you can go and see if you have sections in your course. If you go to course admin and you go to, usually in course offering information, you'll be able to come and see if you have any sections in your course. This one doesn't. So if you don't have sections in your course, I would advise going in through the group tool and and doing that. And again, I saw a question about how do we make sections. If you are in that scenario that I described, where maybe you're a kindergarten teacher or you're a high school teacher, or you might even be teaching a split grade and you want them both in the same, maybe you're teaching a 5-6 split and you want them together, that's something that your Brightspace administrator will need to help you with. They'll need to do that sectioning for you. And then, yes, a follow-up question. If you had a split grade and you wanted to create specific assignments for subject or grade, yes. So depending on if you kind of split them up into groups yourself, or if they were in sections because they were in a grade, let's say a grade 2 class in Brightspace and a grade 3 class in Brightspace, and your district put them into one, then you would have sections, and you could use the release conditions by either section or group. So basically, sectioning groups are it's another way that we can be organizing the students that we have in our class so that we can use some of the really rich features within Brightspace. So for example, release conditions can be used a lot to help differentiate learning because you can control who sees what and when. Okay, so I'm just looking at some of our other questions here. Okay, so we have question from Christine about real-time virtual classroom. So if we do a real-time virtual classroom, is there a way to break the students into group for small group discussions and come back as a group? So this is actually a feature that is coming next month, I believe, in August. However, virtual classroom has 2 modes to it. So there's a freemium mode that all of our, pretty much all of our clients have access to. I don't believe, Heather, maybe you might know different than me. I think the breakout sessions might be a premium feature.
I think so too.
So if your district has the premium version of virtual classroom, then that breakout session is an option that you would have. So you'll just need to reach out to your Brightspace administrator to see if that is something that you might have access to. You are very welcome. Okay.
So we have another question here about groups, Val. Groups are very, very, very popular today.
I love it.
Can you have a group within a group? So for example, my grade 3s versus grade 4s are divided in 4 different reading groups.
Interesting. Let me think about that. I have not been asked that question before.
I know, I've never tried to make subgroups either. I don't think it is possible though.
Well, okay, so kind of. Might not be the answer you want to hear, but depending, if I've understood this correctly, because you can have multiple groups, it depends. So I could have, sorry, I'm trying to work through this and make sure I understand the question. I can have several groups in here. And the way that groups work is that they kind of can be groups within a group by the way that they're created, if that makes sense. So right here, I have one group category that's one-to-one students, and then these are all kind of groups within this group because I wanted all my students to be in one group. In terms of, I just want to go back and read that question. Oh, I think it's gone. Heather, can you just, could you repeat that for me, please?
The question was, can you create groups inside of groups? So we're looking to create like a group with a subgroup.
Okay.
Multiple level reading groups.
Right. So I think in that case, I would create, like in my example here, I have reading groups, and then within my category of reading groups, so instead of creating, you know, category reading group 1, reading group 2, reading group 3, I would have my overall category of groups, and then I would have my individual groups within. And I think if I was teaching a course, I think that's how I would do it, just because it will also make it easier that way when you're using the groups within the system, because then you don't have to select all of those different groups. You'll have your reading group category, it'll be selected into all these different reading groups, and then it will just kind of automatically push it to those or create those spaces or whatever it might be that you're trying to do for those groups. I hope that makes sense and that it actually answers your question. Yeah, and then actually we have a really great suggestion here as well. Another, thank you, Heather, for this. Another suggestion that we have from a user is creating like having a group, but having a conditional release on the discussion topic, and then set up a group within those conditional release that group. So that's actually a really great thing that you can do as well. So if there's only like one small group of students that it applies to, you could use a conditional release to have it apply to that group instead of having to set up group work or a group discussion for everyone. That's a really great suggestion. Thank you. Okay. Another question here. Heather, I think you answered this in the background here, but it has come up a couple times, so I just want to answer it too. We've been getting some questions about if I have a teaching partner, or if I am a kindergarten teacher and I have a DECE, or if I have an EA who's in my classroom with me, can they see my course? Can they see it how I see it? This will very much depend on your district, how they have set up your class, and how they have set up the role for other educators who might not be the homeroom teacher or the main facilitator of the course. In my experience, for the most part, that is something that is totally possible, and we do see it quite a bit, where you'll have an educator in the course and they will be able, if I come in here, and if you don't have class lists on your navbar, again, remember you can come in here and you can find all your tools from Course Admin. I could come into my class list, and sometimes districts will give you permission to add people into your course. So I could come in here and I could add an existing user. If my, my EA or my DCE wasn't automatically put into my class from the student information system, it will depend on how that setup has been done from the board level, but I could come and add that person in. And depending on their role, they'll usually be given it's usually called a teacher role. It doesn't mean that you are a teacher. It just means that those are the permissions that you have. So you might have the permissions in the system that they call a teacher role, if that makes sense. Usually it's more of that instructor role. And then they'll be able to come in. And we have some aspects of the site that are set up on that principle. So for example, since the one question I saw was for a kindergarten example, if I come into my portfolio tool, we had an update last year where we allow that kind of facilitation between the educators in the background. So if I come into this this painting, this art painting, for example. Up here, I have the ability to do my educator feedback, but down in, I'm just gonna collapse that for a moment, down in my educator only comments, you can see I have the option to have my own private anecdotal notes, or you see that I have the option here to make it visible. And what that means is that if I had another educator in my course, they would be able to come and they would be able to see my note, and they'd also be able to add their own note depending on the permissions that they were given. So I hope that helps for other people who might be also wondering that as well. Awesome. And I know we are at just over 5, so if you have to take off, totally understand, no hard feelings. We hope to see you next week. We are just gonna answer, we have a couple more questions that I would like to answer. So We have a question here from Greg. At the secondary level, when there are multiple sections of a particular class, we were told that teachers could share the same Brightspace class. Can you discuss how I might be able to post material for my class or both classes and what a student would see between my posts and my teaching partner's post? Interesting. Okay, let me just think about this because I actually believe I was chatting a few months ago about this, which now, you know, in the current times that we're living, seems like it was a lot longer than a couple months ago. So the way that that would work is essentially you would have this one classroom space and you and multiple educators would be in here. So there are certain times where your educator, or sorry, your students would be able to see if you're posting something or if another educator is posting something. And for example, in activity feed, that would be one instance where your students would be able to see if you posted that or if someone else posted that. Same in discussions, anywhere where there's kind of that author tag that pops up in the system. So that would be one way that your students would see. You could also devise your own system. So in assignments, for example, if you were creating an assignment, I don't believe that that will show potentially what educator posted it. That's not something I've heard of before, but you could devise your own system where you could kind of sign off like, you know, let me know if you have any questions, Mr. or Miss so-and-so. In terms of the sections, when you are posting and creating comments or content and such with sections, my understanding is that by default, it will display for both sections, and then you have controls to be showing it for just one section. So for example, if I have, actually, no, we'll switch it up. We'll go to reading and writing. So maybe I have this Christmas Carol lesson that I made, and it was a quick video that took students through the material. Maybe this is an extra component, or maybe my other section isn't quite there yet, so I don't want them to see it. I can come up to my release conditions, and then this is where I can differentiate between those sections. So I would be able to create, I would be able to come down to class list and select the selection enrollment, and then I would be able to come in. I don't have any sections in this demo course, unfortunately, to take you through the rest of this example, but then that's where I could come and then I could differentiate who sees what. But my understanding is that by default, most things are open to all, and then you would have to go in and differentiate when it's not, when you only want one section to see one thing. I hope that answers the question. Okay, so I have another question here from Valerie. Last May, I learned that I would have to create restrictions in order to assign an assignment to specific students. Has that process been made easier so that you don't always have to create a restriction for each assignment in order to differentiate? So right now, my understanding is that you will need to still create restrictions. But depending on how you set, I think the easiest way to do this for me is thinking about how you can use that group tool to there are ways to do this. So one option is that restrictions. So you could have groups set up. So if you know that you're commonly going to release certain tasks for certain people, you could set that up. Another reason why it can be really useful to have those one-on-one groups set up is that it really easily allows you to just restrict something for a couple students, because you would go and click those groups. So let me see if I can show that example. So view release conditions, create group enrollment, and then I could come and I would create and do it like that, but I wouldn't have to go and, you know, leave, make that new group, come back. It would already be ready. Something else that might help as well is depending on what you want to be different about the assignment, there is the ability to do special access. So actually, I'm going to go to my quiz tool for this example. We'll play with something different. And we'll go to the planets quiz. So another option that I have is that I can also have special access. And oh, you're very welcome. So I just see some people signing off and saying thanks. You are all very, very welcome. So I do also have options for special access. So if this is a quiz and this is in assignments, if you're using, we just got a brand new, really nice new assignment creation experience. So if that's what you're using, and you don't see this feature yet, it is coming in September. But there is a way to do special access so that you don't have to create the release condition. You can come and just make it so that only special users have access to that quiz or to that assignment. And you can kind of create the restrictions that way without it actually having to be a release condition. So you do have two options, and I could choose an option. So for example, for the quiz, you know, I could choose the time limit recommended. Maybe it's an enforced time limit. So if this is a final exam, for example, maybe they only have 3 hours to do it, or maybe they only have an hour to do part of this. I can come and do that. I can give them a grace period and a notification. And then I can also choose what the behavior happens. So maybe it's a soft limit. I want them to be able to keep working afterwards. That's totally fine. Do I want them to just not be able to go back and make any changes on that quiz? And then this is an option that we don't tend to see in K-12. It's a bit harsh in my opinion, but it is there, being able to do the attempt as 0. And I can also, again, forward this in quizzes and then come down and decide who has special access. So if I only want special access to see this quiz, I can come and add that. I just have, because I've done this quiz with different demos, I'm getting a conflicting message from something else I had already done. And then you can see I can come and I can choose the students and I can give them that special access. And no, this isn't just applicable to quizzes. This is applicable in assignments as well. It's just that if we have, if I go into assignments, there's a new assignments creation experience that some districts have turned on. So if I click new assignment, just give it a second here, your screen might look like this now if your district has made that change, in which case it will eventually be under, I believe it will be under conditions. It's not there yet. In our old experience, just switching back to check something. You would have that option under restrictions. So if if it looks like this for now, you can see I have special access in quizzes as well. Allow users with special access to submit outside the normal availability dates, or allow users with special access to see only them to see this folder. Okay, and we have, I think our last question for today is, I have students who submit their work by email or on paper rather than Dropbox. Is there a way to track and still give feedback in Brightspace? You betcha. This is one of my aha moments when we got this update. So if I go to create an assignment, and actually I'm just going to turn that new experience on because it's a lot more streamlined. It's a great update that we have here. When I am creating, so I've given it a name, I've gone through all my kind of workflow, so on and so forth. When I come and I am using maybe some of those optional features, by default, it will make it a file submission where that kind of traditional online where the student has to upload something. But we have 4 different submission types in Brightspace. So I could do that, that kind of old school file submission if I want, where they have to upload or connect something from their Google Drive or their OneDrive. I can also do a text submission where they are typing their answer directly into the environment. What's really great about this text submission as well is they get that HTML editor bar that you get when you're creating content. So they could also do a quick video note if you want to give them that video option, or to insert an image, or to insert a picture, or sorry, a video, so on and so forth. And then we have on-paper submission and observed in-person submission. So this would be more of what you're after. And what I love about this is all this is signaling to Brightspace is that I want to provide success criteria. I want to maybe have a rubric. I want to be able to give all of my students their assessment information, but they're not submitting something in Brightspace. And then it allows you to still make use of all of those assessment tools. So they're not going to actually upload anything into Brightspace, but I can still have a rubric. I can still put the information, the instructions, the handouts, whatever it might be that they need to be successful. And then I can also, put feedback in there. I can assess the rubric, so on and so forth, so that all of their assessment information, whether they're actually doing the work in Brightspace or not, lives in Brightspace. And I just think that's fabulous, because you no longer have to worry about, their assessment information being divided. So that can get a bit confusing if some of it's in Brightspace and some of it is not. So this just makes it so that you can really have Brightspace as your assessment hub, if you will, so to speak, so that regardless of when they got that feedback or that rubric, it's still here. I used to teach high school English, and I used to spend a lot of time annotating assignments. I used to provide lots of handwritten feedback, and then the next time that assignment came, a similar assignment came, they may have lost that feedback, which could be, a bit frustrating for me as an educator, but also it doesn't serve them, because then they lost their feedback. So that way it would all be here. And for right now, there's a follow-up question to that. Is it the whole class, or can you pick? Right now, it is all or none. So it would be all the students. If you do a text submission, they all need to upload it in a text submission. If it's on paper, they would all be doing on paper, but that is feedback that we've heard quite a bit, and we'd be happy to take back again to our product team about maybe having some options here. Okay, so I think we got through all of the questions. Heather, I haven't missed anything, have I?
I don't think so. I tried to keep on top of answering the ones I could easily in writing, and then floating the ones up to you to do live or to demo. So I think we got through all of them.
Okay, awesome. So thank you so much.
Oh, wait, there's one more here. Michelle, okay, thanks. Everything is dependent on this, or can I still do other things? Michelle, we might need a little bit more information as to what you're talking about. What other things are you trying to achieve? So if you can drop it into the Q&A there with some more details, that would help Val to answer it. But I think otherwise we got everything sorted. Yes, Heather Howell, the submission types are fairly new. In the last, what, Val, 6 months? The different submission types, or 8 months maybe?
Yeah, I think it came out towards spring, maybe last school year. I think it's one of those things where I feel like we've had it longer than it feels, if that makes sense. But yeah, it's newer. So if you've been teaching with Brightspace for a while, or maybe you tried out Brightspace a number of years ago and now you're coming back to it, that would be new. It hasn't always been there.
Val, can you show Michelle where the waffle is?
Yeah, I sure can. So if I'm understanding this correctly, when we speak about the waffle, that's your course selector waffle, and it's up here. I'm not enrolled in any other courses in this account, but if I was, I would be able to access all my other courses, and students will be able to as well.
We just have a question about the checklist tool, or I guess any tool really. If you can't see it on your nav bar, how can we locate those tools?
Yeah, awesome. So the checklist tool, nope, is not something that boards have to pay for. It's something that comes as a part of the Brightspace platform. A couple different things. So if you're not seeing something on your nav bar, you can you can edit your nav bar if you want a certain tool to exist there. So maybe you plan on using the checklist quite a bit, so you want it up there for you and your students. You can come and add links. Link just being when I click this icon, it's going to link me to another part of the platform, and I can come and I can see the system links as anything that's provided within Brightspace here. You could search, you could go through. However, another way that you can see everything that you have access to is in your course administration. So this is your big toolbox, and you can come and see all the various tools that you have. So you can see under here in assessment, I have checklists. Caveat here. So if you're still not seeing something, it might be that your district doesn't have it turned on. Some districts might not turn on all of the tools that Brightspace has. In that case, you could reach out to your Brightspace administrator and ask for them to turn on that tool. So I hope that answers your question. And as Heather said, that would be the same for any of the tools that you saw here today. So if discussions isn't showing up in your course, I would suggest checking your course admin, checking if you want to add it to your nav bar, and then if you're not seeing it in course admin, definitely if you're not seeing it in course admin, reach out to your Brightspace administrator. And for everyone who's pouring in the thank yous, you are very, very welcome. I'm glad that it seems like the session today was helpful, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Again, we'll be doing another one on supporting non-screen activities, and it will be the same format as today. So it will be about a 30-ish minute webinar, and then a 30-ish, give or take, Ask the Expert session at the end. So you are all very welcome. I hope you have a fantastic day. Awesome, thanks everyone. Oh, an important question about registering. If you go back to that education webinar page where you would have registered for today's session, you'll probably be able to find a link to it. I think I did a tweet today. So if you go to my, not to plug my Twitter or anything here, we used to have a, Heather will laugh, we used to have a bit of a competition here about our about our Twitters. If you go to my Twitter here, then you'll be able to find a link. But if you go back to that education webinar page, you'll be able to register for all of our upcoming sessions. All of our sessions from next week until the end of August are up there for you to register. Awesome. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Oh, Heather, were you going to say something?
On the same site, any of the recordings or slide decks from any of our previous webinars are all linked there for you to access as well. So, and they're all broken down into different sections to help you with finding the information you're looking for.
Awesome. Thanks, Heather. Okay. Have a great day, everyone. See you next week.